Edward R. Roybal Institute on Aging, William Vega.
Welcome to USC and to our annual Roybal Memorial Lecture Program. We're pleased that we have our distinguished individuals here that we will honor who have spent their adult lives working to improve the quality of life for all Americans, and especially the most vulnerable Americans. Today, we're going to show our appreciation for their accomplishments. I would also like to welcome Congresswoman Lucille Roybal-Allard and Congresswoman Karen Bass, as well as many members, hopefully, of the Roybal family that will be present. And we thank all of you for coming. And I hope we see you actually every year. It is my pleasure also to welcome to the stage Dean Marilyn Flynn. Dean Flynn has been steadfast in her support of the Edward Roybal Institute on Aging and the field of aging in general. That support has been critical to our existence at the Roybal Institute and has helped us to develop in very creative ways a comprehensive program of research and service, which is still in the progress of growing. Dean Flynn.
So welcome to all of you here today. I'm honored to introduce a great friend of the school, Congresswoman Lucille Roybal-Allard. A political pioneer, in 1992, Congresswoman Roybal-Allard became the first Mexican-American woman elected to Congress. Before that, she represented the 56th Assembly District of California for 6 years. She's also the first Latina in U.S. history to be appointed to the Appropriations Committee in Congress, which controls what's left of the purse strings of the federal government. The Congresswoman serves on 3 influential subcommittees: the Subcommittee on Homeland Security, the Subcommittee on Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development and Related Agencies, and the Subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education. Last week, she joined 8 other congressional champions honored for their commitment to the National Institute of Health and biomedical research. It's with great pleasure that I welcome today's honorary co-host, Congresswoman Lucille Roybal-Allard.
Okay, thank you, Dean Flynn, for that very kind introduction. It seems impossible that 4 years have passed since we gathered here on the campus of the University of Southern California to celebrate the establishment of the Edward R. Roybal Institute on Aging. And I am so happy to be here on behalf of the Roybal family to personally thank Dean Flynn, Dr. Vega, and the entire Trojan family for their ongoing commitment to the Institute and to the vision my father held so dear, the successful translation of research into practical strategies for successful aging. While my good friend, President Nikias, could not be with us today, I do want to acknowledge him for the support that he has given to the Institute and for his commitment to ensuring that the success of the Institute's mission is realized. Without him, the Institute's move to USC could not possibly have happened. I also want to acknowledge the work of Dr. William Vega, who has brought new energy to the Institute. In 2010, under his leadership, the Roybal Institute had an exciting year. In the fall, the Institute launched its newly designed website and published its first health policy brief entitled The Los Angeles Population Change and Healthy Aging. And in the fall, I was absolutely thrilled that Dr. Vega accepted my invitation to participate on the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute's Health Disparities Roundtable in Washington, D.C. The roundtable was part of CHCI's annual summit and gala, which is attended by thousands of individuals, nonprofits, elected officials, and corporations from around the country. And I had the privilege of chairing the roundtable, which featured First Lady Michelle Obama as the keynote speaker. And I can tell you that Dr. Vega added tremendous valuable information and insights to the panel discussion. So again, Dr. Vega, I want to thank you again for your participation. Before introducing tonight's keynote speaker, I do want to extend my sincere congratulations to the recipients of today's awards, Mr. Saletti Jones, the winner of the first USC Roybal Institute Community Partnership Award, and Mr. James Jackson, this year's winner of the prestigious Pearman Prize for Excellence in Research on Aging. So congratulations to both of you. Tonight I have the great honor of introducing my colleague Karen Bass, who will be giving this year's Edward R. Roybal Memorial Lecture. Congresswoman Bass was elected last November to serve California's 33rd Congressional District. She is the newest member of the Los Angeles Congressional Delegation, and let me tell you, in the short time that she has been there, I can tell you very sincerely that you are very lucky to have her as USC's new congressional representative. Many of you probably know her for her historic election as the 67th Speaker of the California Assembly, in which she became the first African American woman in the country to serve in this powerful state legislative role. Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi immediately recognized Karen's leadership qualities, and only a few weeks after she entered the halls of Congress, Leader Pelosi selected her to serve on the prestigious Steering and Policy Committee, which sets the policy direction of the Democratic caucus. Karen was also appointed to the important committees of Budget, for which she has a big challenge, and Foreign Affairs, another big challenge. In the short time that she has been in Congress, she has distinguished herself as a talented, hardworking, and committed member of the House of Representatives. And I certainly look forward to working with her in support of USC and the Roybal Institute to ensure all America's seniors have the information, the resources, and the care they need and deserve to flourish as they age. I am thrilled she is honoring us tonight as our keynote speaker. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Congresswoman Karen Bass.
Good afternoon, everyone. It really is my pleasure to be here with you this evening, and I want to thank Dean Flynn and Dr. Vega, and especially the Congresswoman. A lot of people have asked me what it feels like to be in Congress, and I've been there for a total of about 50 days, so it's still very new. But one thing that has really been a pleasure, though, is to serve alongside people like the Congresswoman, who's been there for a number of years, who just immediately embraces you, takes you under their wing, and is so willing and open to share. And I actually remember you from when I was at Community Coalition, my organization a little bit south from here, is not even in your district. But you were always there to support us when we went through whatever battles we had. You always had staff there, and I always really appreciated that, and it's an honor to me to serve alongside of you now. So my pleasure to be here at USC. I'm happy to say that I now represent USC. For the last 6 years, I've been representing that other college on the other side. But now representing USC, where I served as a member of the faculty in the medical school for a number of years before going to the State Assembly in '05. When I started Community Coalition in 1990, I continued to serve in that role as faculty, and even beginning then in the early 90s, we always had students from the social welfare department come to our organization and serve as interns, and I have to say that they always made an outstanding contribution, and ever since I've been in elected office, we continue to come back every year and look for other interns. We have 2 that are working with us now, and they've always been exceptional, so I appreciate that partnership and look forward to continuing that. Today is also an honor for me to speak before you, to speak before the Roybal Institute. And when I think of the congressman, you know, he was not just a giant in Congress, a champion of civil rights, but he was personally a hero of mine. His fight for the rights of everyone who suffered discrimination, including our elders, made an indelible mark on our country and on our culture, and he inspired succeeding generations of activists and legislators to continue the struggle for equality. From founding and chairing the House Select Committee on Aging, to helping to create the Centers for Disease Control, to being one of the first elected officials to speak out about the AIDS epidemic and to call for funding to research, Congressman Roybal fought the tough battles and won. And the work of the Roybal Institute is so important, especially today, since these are very difficult times for our nation and for our seniors in particular. Seniors living on fixed incomes who have seen their savings or retirement investments evaporate because of the economic downturn. Everyone, but especially seniors, have had an increasingly difficult time keeping up with the rising cost of living, especially health care. But there was a bright light last year when we passed the Affordable Care Act. Health care reform allows finally our nation to join the rest of the industrialized nations of the world in providing health care for our population. It really is a crime to think that for too long seniors have had to choose between a meal and the medicine that they need. I know everyone here is aware of the new law and the significance of the new law, and we can frankly judge the significance by the intensity of the opposition. If you just think about the opposition that even distorted the name. I hate it when I hear it called Obamacare. A real distortion. Opposition that was willing to deliberately deceive the public, especially seniors, frightening people by creating fictional death panels that would decide when someone had received enough care. Opposition that was willing to recruit candidates and win elections based on the grand deceptions. And I've made it a habit of telling the story because I think it's so symbolic of what we're facing in Congress now. You know, I'm a freshman, which is like being a freshman in college. And there's over 90 of us that are in the freshman class. It's the largest freshman class in recent history. And so on the first day of class, we were sitting in the orientation session, and that's when, you know, you go through the standard stuff about your benefits and all. And so they were telling us about our benefits, and right in the middle, in the first couple of hours, one of my colleagues jumped up in full indignation and said, "What do you mean my health care won't start for the first month? I have never had a job where I didn't have health care on day one." And I thought to myself, I never had a job where I had health care that started on day one. I mean, usually you go through the probationary period and your benefits kick in. Well, he said, "What am I supposed to do for the 28 days when I don't have my health care?" And we all sat in utter amazement because this was an individual who campaigned on the repeal of health care reform. So a few of my colleagues went around with a letter, and I know the Congresswoman knows this, trying to get people to sign up to opt out of health care. Those folks that wanted health care repealed, well, maybe you shouldn't have your government-funded health care. Anyway, not many signed that list. I do wonder what my colleagues are going to do, though, when they're not able to turn back the clock on health care. Last week I watched, you know, we're in the middle of the continuing resolution, and just for point of information, you know, last year a budget wasn't passed, and so in order to keep the government functioning, you have to pass a continuing resolution which says you'll continue spending at the same level as you were spending at last year. Well, some of my colleagues who ran on severe cuts, wanting to cut $100 billion out of the current year that we're in, now we're halfway through, so $100 billion out of the current year, they passed several amendments to the continuing resolution, and nine of those amendments would serve the purpose of gutting funding for health care reform. So just to explain that, one of the amendments would prohibit spending federal dollars to pay the salaries of Health and Human Services staff to implement health care reform. Another amendment would prohibit funding for the development of the rules that would define the essential benefits that all health plans must include. Another amendment would prohibit funding to force insurers to spend the majority of their resources on care instead of administration or profit. My colleagues who were elected and swore to go to D.C. and cut spending immediately, we were sitting together on the Budget Committee in the last couple of weeks, and we had presentations from Bernanke and Geithner, who said, if we did severely cut spending right now, when we're technically out of this recession, but unemployment is still really high, we would actually do severe damage to the economy because we would add to unemployment. When you're talking about cuts and, government employees have been demonized, so you would just be cutting the government workforce, which isn't true. You all know that a lot of government money goes to the private sector, so you're talking about private sector jobs as well. And so the objecting to continuing the funding at the current limits, some of the amendments that would put forward would immediately cut funding to infrastructure projects. That would result in a loss of 284,000 construction jobs. Some of the amendments that were particularly troubling to me were gutting the funding for family planning, for Planned Parenthood, and then gutting the funding for WIC, and then gutting the funding for Head Start. So it's like you won't have contraception, so you'll have a baby. We block WIC, so you won't have food. We cut Head Start, so you won't have early education. 55,000 early education teachers would be laid off. $1.6 billion cut from the National Institute of Health, which would result in 20,000 fewer researchers. However, we did propose some cuts that we thought made sense. For example, cutting $100 million to the defense budget because that money would go to pay NASCAR, to put advertisement on race cars, to advertise for the National Guard. That was blocked. So the NASCAR will continue to get $100 million. Kind of crazy, huh? The good news is that the continuing resolution that was passed out of the House last week has already been announced dead on arrival to the Senate. So we now are within days of the showdown as to whether or not the government shuts down. When we get back on Monday, we'll have literally 5 days before the continuing resolution that's currently in place expires. And if we don't pass another continuing resolution, then the government will have to shut down. So I think we've kind of come to, a crossroads as to which way we'll go. So to me, when I think about all of this, I often talk about a great debate that's taking place in our nation about really what kind of country do we want. I kind of feel like we're fighting for the moral fabric of our country. But I think it's best described by an article that I was reading yesterday from Dr. Lakoff, who's a linguist, and he describes the struggle this way. The country that I want to see is characterized, he uses a quote from President Obama, empathy, citizens caring for each other, both social and personal responsibility. From these, our freedoms and our way of life follow, as does the role of government, to protect and empower everyone equally. Protection includes safety, health, and the environment. No one can be free without these, and without a commitment to care and act on that care by one's fellow citizens. So that's one viewpoint. I think another viewpoint is some people believe in individual responsibility alone, not social responsibility, not thinking that the government should help its citizens, short of, say, a natural disaster. The part of government they want to cut is not the military, not government subsidies to corporations, not the aspect of government that fits their worldview. They want to cut the part that helps people. Why? Because that violates individual responsibility. One thing that I think we need to look at as we continue to be in this economic crisis are cuts that might make sense. So one thing that I was surprised to learn last week was that in Germany, we have over 200 military bases in Germany. Those military bases have been there for 65 years. They were set up, during World War II, post-World War II, to address the Cold War. And if you think about it, we've had a generation grow up since the Cold War ended. So why do we need over 200 bases in Germany? I think that that's something that we need to think about and grapple with when it really does come to the need to make some cuts. Where do you cut where you really don't get at the social fabric, or you don't damage, rather, further the social fabric of our country? So if you analyze the policies that are currently being pushed, the amendments that were put forward in our House, it really is true that the part of government that should be severely cut, renegotiated, and abandoned is the part of government that helps people, leaving people to fend for themselves, including the elders of our society. Instead of honoring the elders of our society, actually, we're talking about gambling with their future. Just imagine if we had turned Social Security over to the stock market the last time privatization of Social Security was proposed. When the economy nearly collapsed in 2008, hundreds of thousands of seniors would have lost everything. So if we had turned it over to the stock market, we would really be in a bad way. But those proposals are being resurrected again, and we should take note of that. The new chair of the Budget Committee has put forward what he calls the roadmap for America's future, and I would definitely suggest that people look at that roadmap, because I think it's rather frightening. It's calling for a couple of things. Fundamental changes, one, to Social Security, maybe gambling with it again, but also taking Medicare and turning it into a voucher system where if you, and I think the voucher is somewhere to the tune of about, $6,000, $7,000. And I used to work in the medical field. When I worked at SC, when I was on the faculty, it wasn't here, it was at the medical school campus, and I worked in the emergency room for several years. And you can go to the emergency room with a broken arm and spend $6,000. So, that really concerns me about what would happen after that. Well, is the Health Care Reform Act perfect? No, it absolutely isn't. No change this large ever is. And, I was reminded by some of my colleagues when the Civil Rights Act was passed, and also even when Social Security was passed, it was a beginning. It wasn't the end. So when the Civil Rights Act was first passed, voting rights wasn't included in it. Housing discrimination wasn't included in it. And so there were a lot of people who were against the Civil Rights Act when it was first proposed because they said it didn't go far enough. And if you think about it, that's the same thing that happened with the health care debate. But what was viewed is that the Civil Rights Act was the beginning, and over time they added in the different parts. And so I do think that there's a lot of changes that are needed in health care reform. But what I'm not willing to do, though, is to go back to a time when having anything short of perfect health was reason to deny coverage. Wild stories came out, if you remember. I remember this one story of a family with a premature baby. Their insurance was denied because they said the baby had a pre-existing condition, prematurity. I'm not willing to go back to a time when one illness could put a hard-working family in bankruptcy, and I'm not willing to go back to a time when seniors take only the medications that they can afford rather than the medications they need. And at a time when this country desperately needs jobs, I'm not willing to allow the repeal of a bill that will create 30,000 new jobs in the healthcare field. And for those of us that work in healthcare, when the bill passed, all I could think of is that we don't have enough healthcare providers now. So the idea of expanding it to include 30 million more people really is going to require us having lots and lots of new jobs, good jobs, jobs that can't be exported, jobs that can't be completely replaced by technology, and some jobs that don't require years and years of education. People think when they think of healthcare, they think of doctors and nurses. But there's phlebotomists, there's technicians, there's all kinds of careers. There's social workers, of course. There's all kinds of careers that are needed and jobs that are needed. So as far as I was concerned, healthcare reform really was a jobs bill, and I do think jobs is the #1 issue right now that our country faced. Well, as one of my new assignments, Leader Pelosi did assign me to the Budget Committee, and I do have to confess that when I first heard it, I immediately had bad flashbacks to Sacramento. The idea of going back to the budget. But seriously, I am proud to serve on the Budget Committee because I do believe that a budget is really a statement of values. It says a lot about who and what we value as a society. I am concerned, though, that if we look at the cuts that are proposed on a national level, how that's going to trickle down to California. So the trickle-down effect really is going to have a terrible impact on California, where we continue to face a $20 billion deficit. And I mean, you just have to stop and think. When I was sworn in as Speaker in 2008, the budget of California was $110 billion. It's now $83 billion. And people have felt the pain of that reduction. So we're down $83 billion, and now we have a $20 billion deficit. And so, you know, my colleagues, when they sent me off to Washington, they expected me to bring resources back to California. And now, you know, it's going to be a question of fighting to keep the level that we have now. So I think of healthcare reform and services that are going to be added on a national level, such as home care, and that's where California shines. I mean, we have one of the best examples of a home care system in the country, and now, ironically, we're going to be in a position of really hurting that, you know, with budget cuts that are pending. All of us understand that this country faces a fiscal crisis, but we cannot use this crisis as an excuse to fundamentally change the values of our nation. As Dr. Lakoff describes, you know, the personal responsibility values thing, it really can run amok. And we cannot degenerate into a country that is based on the survival of the fittest, and the heck with you if you need help. We cannot abandon our obligations as a society. What value statement is made when you shred the safety net for seniors, for children, for the sick, and for the poor, all the while giving tax breaks to millionaires? Where are the values in that? If we look to the life and the leadership of Congressman Roybal, you can see how his values were illustrated by the legislation he fought for, the initiatives he was able to start, and the programs that continue today. Well, now I believe that it's our responsibility to continue his legacy by refusing to allow the clock to be turned back, by refusing to allow the elimination of the programs that he fought for and won, and by protecting the values he held dear, and the values I believe still need to define our nation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
That was a very strong and informative presentation. I want to thank you so much for that. This year I have the pleasure to award the inaugural USC Roybal Institute Community Partnership Award, and I want to repeat, it's inaugural, it's the first time we've given it. This award recognizes a community practitioner whose work best demonstrates the direct impact of partnerships on the lives of older persons, particularly those from low-income and multi-ethnic backgrounds. Our inaugural recipient has a distinguished career with countless accomplishments, rendering mental health treatment services to older adults and families, fostering and establishing community partnerships, providing education, information, and consultation on best practice treatment interventions to address the very complex issues facing older adults, particularly the underserved ethnic populations with mental illnesses. It gives me great pleasure to present the USC Roybal Institute Community Partnership Award to Sleety M. Jones.
Good evening, and thank you very much. This award not only is a privilege, but it's also a humbling experience. I have worked in mental health since 1970 and have endeavored over that period of time to bring a relationship to both the community and my clients that I'd hoped that I had the chance to experience as a young child growing up. And I recall this experience for you because I think relationship is first. And fortunately, this discipline teaches that. My father, at age 55, had a stroke and subsequently could no longer work. He had 11 children. 4 of them were still at home. And we were, I guess you could say, forced into going on the county dole. So once every 2 weeks, I would go to the welfare office with my mother, once very proud woman, who had supported this family of 11 quite well with her husband, and watch her stand on this side of the table as the person on the other side of the table foisted upon her humiliation and disrespect for the role that she was in. And I swore to myself when I got into community service, when I got into mental health, that every relationship I established, whether it was with a consumer, whether it was with a colleague, whether it was with industry, whether it was governmental, that relationship would be first. So, over the past 20 years, I've been privileged to work for the Department of Mental Health and with my colleagues here who supported the Older Adult FACS program in the many years that we've served older adults, and the program itself, and the 150 courageous interns who took our mission and took our vision into the streets, established the relationship with the community, with industry, with our clients that I'm being honored for today. And I thank them as well as I do you. Thank you.
This is a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This year, the Permain Prize for Excellence in Research on Aging honors a distinguished scholar who has conducted pioneering research and has trained a generation of scholars, including many ethnic minority scholars, who are actively conducting research on aging among African Americans at the University of Michigan, and now, of course, across the country, and some of their faculty, of course, are here at the University of Michigan, including at USC, including our own Associate Director, Karen Lincoln. He has made truly outstanding contributions to disparities research about the complex patterns of health determinants in African American populations, and other populations as well. In over 4 decades, he has authored and co-authored numerous books, chapters, and articles that have revolutionized our understanding of the importance of sex, social position, race, both conceptually and empirically, in shaping the life course and well-being of African Americans. I have to say that I've known him for decades, and I've known his work for decades because we've been colleagues. And I honestly believe that the recipient of this award has made the most outstanding contributions that anyone has ever made to the social science of understanding African American life in the United States and health. His work has been translational and policy-oriented. In addition, he is an elected member of the Institute of Medicine, of the National Academies of Science, and has been named to the National Institutes of Health Advisory Council to the Director, and is a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Senior Health Policy Investigator, which is one of the most prestigious awards you can get. I'm one of the reviewers for that. We usually have 300 people that apply. 10 receive the award every year. He is currently Director of the most extensive social, political behavior, and physical and mental health study of African Americans and Caribbean populations ever conducted, the National Survey of American Life, and the Family Connection Survey across generations and nations. It gives me great pleasure to present the Permain Prize for Excellence in Research on Aging to James S. Jackson.
So they told me to say a few words, but they knew what happens when you put an academic in front of at a podium in front of things, and they said, we want you to keep this short. So this is going to be short today. So my thanks to the selection committee, to the dean and the faculty of the School of Social Work, as well as to William Vega. And he doesn't lie. We've known each other for a very, very long time. So I really appreciate this award and being selected for it. I'm going to express my sincere appreciation to, is it Diantha? I would pronounce her name wrong, Pierman, for whose generosity and imagination created this outstanding prize, and I am very, very pleased to be a recipient of it. While I'm being honored for my research, it's the most appropriate that the prize come from a social worker in the School of Social Work. Because a few years ago, when the University of Michigan was celebrating some milestone in the School of Social Work, we discovered that over the course of my nearly 40 years, or it is 40 years or more, that I had actually sat on more dissertations, co-chaired more dissertations, chaired more dissertations in the School of Social Work and the joint program in social science than any other faculty at the University of Michigan. So I was #1 in that particular area. And I've had some wonderful students to go on, including people like Larry Davis, who's now the dean of, at the University of Pittsburgh, who was a student of mine, as well as Linda Chatters and Robert Taylor, who many of you know, who are also students. But they're just among many, many, many students. Thus, this prize honors not only me, but the hundreds of students with whom I've had the pleasure to work with and to influence, I hope at least. I put that in parentheses. From the early days of work on the National Survey of Black Americans, a study that transformed theory and research on race and racialized stressors, and led to life course considerations in a very serious sort of way. That is, it helped change our understanding about the ways in which people's traversing the life course, particularly if they were from different groups, what were the implications for their health and their mental health status, as well as service delivery. To the National Survey of American Life, which we just finished a few years ago, which has influenced thinking on the ways in which race, ethnicity, class, and gender influence morbidity, mortality, and health seeking, not only in the United States, but also in other parts of the world. To our most recent work that is trying to understand the ways in which motivation, the structures in which people live, and environmental factors influence coping and contribute to observed disparities in physical mental health. I hope leading to new conceptualizations and how we understand their interrelationship, and thus how do we design more effective interventions to change people's lives. In all of this work, we have kept our eye firmly on people, their circumstances, their lives, as they traverse their individual life courses. Social science research is a tool that is used to unearth regularities in human behavior within the institutional context of people's lived lives. If we've made some progress in this goal over the last 40 years, and by the way, it's 40 years exactly this year, which is, by the way, over 14,000 days. I did a little calculation on the way out. You know, it's hard to believe. There are a lot of things you can get done. But if we've made some progress in this goal over the last 40 years of my career, I take a great deal of satisfaction in sharing this prize with all my previous, current, and second and third generation students, such as Karen Lincoln, who was mentioned before, and I thank you very much for this award.
Again, as a small token of our appreciation for your outstanding contributions to the field, we give you this award, and it's going to be accompanied by some additional materials we're going to be sending along to you. So,
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you, James. Well, we're at the end of our official program. I sincerely hope you've enjoyed the program, and we hope to see you again next year. Please stay in touch with us. We have a website we're easily communicated with. You just plug in USC and put in Roybal Institute, and you will find us. Enjoy the reception that we have planned for you, and enjoy your evening. Thank you so much for attending.